Welcome to the Think It, Make It podcast. We're all about turning your ideas into reality with a CNC router, tips and tricks, new products, interviews with the pros, and much, much more. Whether you're using a CNC for business or hobby, we have great stuff in store for you.
Let's get on with the show!
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Think and Make It podcast. This is episode number 24. My name is Eric, and I'm here today with Bobby and Greg. And Bobby's back from his short vacation.
We got him back.
And now he is in the hot seat for his project.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Bobby's Cornhole project here, at least the beginnings of it. We were just discussing it for a few seconds before the episode started, and we realized that there are a few different options that he has in front of him that we're going to talk through right now, and we'll probably do a follow-up maybe next week or the week after on what the final decision was on how to make this work. So, all right, Bobby. So right now this is another episode where we are also doing a screen record. So you'll be able to see the video on YouTube and follow us along. We're going to do, again, as good a job as we can about trying to visualize what we're saying as opposed to click here, look at this, that sort of thing. So right now on the screen, we've got a Vectric file open with 2 Cornhole boards. Looks like a 4x8 sheet of plywood. Each board is roughly,
23 and a half by 47 and a half.
Okay.
So still within regulation.
All right. So the concept here is you wanted to do, since we're in Connecticut, you're going to do a state-themed cornhole board?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
So is the goal to have one for every state if this was a business that were to take off, or are you just going to stick with Connecticut for now on?
I'm still going to stay local, like I said from the get-go. I'm going to keep trying to just sell it local specifically.
Okay. So... all right, so what we got now is we got basically one cornhole board has the outline of the state of Connecticut, and the other cornhole board has the Connecticut state seal. Now, let's talk about the outline first. The outline of Connecticut is pretty straightforward. Now, I assume you picked that image up from like Google Images?
Exactly.
And then you did an image trace on it?
Exactly.
And now you're running 2 lines, so there's an outside and inside line. Did the image trace do that, or did you get one outside vector and then do a offset inward?
The image trace did that.
So the image trace gave you 2 lines. Okay. So the first thing we need to do with that is let's take a look at what's the gap between those 2 lines.
So we're going to take our measuring tool here and just pick a nice even spot. It's probably not all the same, but it's probably close. And we're getting about
1.155. So it's a hair
inches
more than 1/8 of an inch. Now, okay, so the ideas that you had here were we could V Carve this, and you could paint it, but you really can't paint it because it's got to have a smooth top. You can't have any lips. So if you did paint it, you would have to do an epoxy pour of clear in order to make it work. So that's one option. The other option is you could use the laser attachment and laser the logo on, but it's gonna, I don't know, I guess
I don't think that'll pop as much though if we do use the laser.
Yeah, laser would be easy, but I don't think it would have that cool effect.
All right, so then the other option is you could pocket out a channel, and then you could use a colored epoxy and do an epoxy pour and then sand it off and polish it and, do that. So you'd get an outline. And then the last option would be you could do an inlay, a wood inlay. So you would actually have you would do a V Carve inlay. So on the surface of the board itself, you would have a V Carve pocket essentially. And then you would have a plug, a male plug that would also be a V carved plug that would fit in there. And then when you're done, you would cut off the excess or use a surfacing bit, surface it off. Now, the issue with that, whether you're using an inlay or epoxy pour, because the plywood, you're using plywood, you do not have a lot of material thickness for that top layer. So surfacing it is not something I would probably feel comfortable doing, because you're really only dealing with about 20 thousandths of thickness on that outside layer of the plywood. So if there's any deviation on your spoil board across a 4-foot span, when you zero your job on the top surface, it could be perfect in one corner, but by the time it gets to the other, you're cutting into that or cutting through that top layer of ply, and that's going to not give you a very good outcome. So if you did a V carved inlay with another piece of contrasting wood, you could use a surfacing bit and bring it down. So you're gonna surface down the inlaid piece of wood, but I would leave it. I wouldn't bring the surfacing bit all the way down to the surface of the plywood. I would leave it, I don't know, 32nd of an inch or so above the surface, and then use a hand sander to sand it down. If you do an epoxy inlay or an epoxy pour, the epoxy is going to mushroom out of the top of the channel, so that's going to have to be dealt with as well. And again, because of I wouldn't use the surfacing bit. I would again go to a palm sander, probably like 80 grit to 120 to 220, and then go up to like 600 to get it polished. And I think you'll come out with something that looks really nice. It's just going to require a little bit more elbow grease to get the detail. Being that, we were trying to do these with as much CNC involvement as possible, the V Carve inlay is kind of a cool idea because it can't be done any other way than with a CNC machine. So that's something you've got to think about. And what I would do, because I'm on vacation next week, so what I would do is I would, you and Greg maybe set up a test, and with some scrap and play with that and set up a V Carve inlay. And there are a bunch of videos, but we'll come back and we'll be able to describe what you guys actually did to get a successful inlay.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I think the state of Connecticut, the outline here is going to be pretty easy. I think we might run into some issues with the seal here.
Well, go back to the outline first, because there's
a couple spots that need to be cleaned up in there that I can actually see now.
Yeah, so
if you zoom in, bottom left, exactly right there.
Okay, so ungroup that right now. So when you use an image trace, did you use a black and white image?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So that's the best thing to do. Now, the other issue when you're doing an image trace is, depending on how much noise or how clean that black and white image is, the image trace will put in a lot of extra vector points that it really doesn't need. So what I would do here is, the other thing is you're only 0.155 inches between the two lines. So that's not really a lot. It's 1/8 of an inch, a little over 1/8 of an inch. So on something that's 2 by 4 feet in overall size, I don't know that there's going to be enough contrast there to give you what you need. I would want to see at least 1/4 of an inch or maybe 1/3. So what I would do, delete the inner vector completely, and then select that outer vector, do an inwards offset of like 0.3, and click offset. Okay. Now delete the outside vector, select the inside vector, do a 0.3 offset outward. Now you're probably wondering why I had you do that. So when you do that, Vectric will simplify the node points. So when you go from the original, see how it's a lot smoother now looking than it was before? When you have a really jagged image trace and you create an offset inward, it's going to smooth all that out. And then when you delete the original outside one and then go outward, now you're taking a smooth one and you're copying it, essentially making it a little larger. So that's going to give you a much better look. Now, near the top, there's a little, there's a
zoom in there.
Yeah, there's a couple like artifacts in there. So you'll have to go through. Now, the other thing you can do is go ahead and click on either vector. It doesn't matter. And hit N on the keyboard, as in Nancy. Okay. Now you can see one thing it does is it creates a crazy amount of node points. Now keep in mind, every node point you see on the screen is a line of G-code. So there is a massive amount of G-code here to make this happen, and it's going to really slow down the machine when it's trying to run this. So what I would do is go ahead and go to Curve Fit Vectors. icon. And then I would leave the tolerance at, 10 thousandths is fine. Keep sharp corners. Do replace selected vectors and leave it set to circular arcs. Click preview. You know what? Since this is so big, make the tolerance 0.06. And that's a 16th of an inch. There you go. Okay. So now click OK. Now go ahead and delete the outside vector again.
Ah, interesting. So we're just going to copy this one
Yeah,
again.
copy that one because it's changed the shape slightly. So you're already at outwards. There we go. Now go ahead and select the outside vector and do N again. N, just to see what did it create. Yeah, perfect. So now you've got a pretty clean outline with not a ton of node points, not a ton of excessive node points. And you've got a gap of about 0.3 inches, which is whether you do an epoxy pour or a wood inlay on a board that size, it's really going to pop. You're going to have a defining line there. And maybe what you do is you can get a cool font and put the letter CT in the center or something like that if you wanted to, just to go a little extra. There is an artifact on the bottom still. You might want to get that. It's bothering me. Okay, so yeah, now you've got a really cool outline that you can do something with without a lot of erroneous vectors and stuff, and the shape is pretty cool. So yeah, you could V Carve inlay that, you could epoxy pour it. Those are really, you could do a paint, but then you have to fill it with clear epoxy. So you got really 3 options if you want to do something that's CNC related.
Now, is this something you would do every time you were to import a black and white photo off of the internet? Is this something you'd clean up consistently like that?
So every time I bring in a black and white image, like say I was going to do the Chevy logo, I do that a lot during classes. I teach people how to use that logo. You bring it in and you do an image trace using Vectric. And the very first thing I do is I look at the vectors it created. I hit N for node editing, and I look and see, is it a clean import? Did it do a clean trace? Is there a ton of excess vectors? Now, for instance, if you do something like a Chevy logo, it's a lot of straight lines. And when there's straight lines, what I expect to see is on every line, every straight line, I only expect to see 2 node points, one at the start, one at the end of that particular line. A lot of times when you do an image trace, though, you'll see like 10 node points for a straight line. It'll just put erroneous things in there. Sometimes I'll do the same thing. I'll do curve fit vector, and I'll change the tolerance, and that'll get rid of some of them. But I wouldn't use circular arcs. I would use Bezier if you're going to do that, because the point is to have only endpoints on that. Sometimes you have to go in and manually edit out nodes you don't want, especially on straight lines. So like in this case where we did an offset inward and outward, I would have taken, like, this is cool because there's a lot of detail to this. But if this was a straight line, version of Connecticut, like the shape of Connecticut, if it had more straight lines, I would have gone in there and I would have edited out or deleted node points so that I don't have anything interrupting the start and end of my node. Everything is nice and straight lines. It takes a little while. There's no doubt about it. But then you would offset that vector after it's cleaned up, and it'll stay clean. It just depends on what you're trying to do. This particular image that you used had a lot of like curves and stuff to it, so it looks kind of cool. So I wouldn't dress this one up too much. We just eliminated probably 2/3 of the unnecessary node points. So it's gonna machine a lot faster now.
Yeah, what you're doing there is making it more efficient for the machine. I've done some traces in the past where I brought it in and it looks okay to the naked eye, but when you really zoom in there, if you use your scroll bar and zoom in to a certain line, there's squiggles, it crosses back in on itself. It really depends on the image, and it depends on the quality of the trace that you're using. I've had great success with the Vectric, with the built-in tracer. I've also had some programs that trace it that come out absolutely awful.
Right. And the thing is there are settings on the image trace that you can play with too. There's a smoothing, where you can a corner fit. There's a couple things you can choose there. And by moving those sliders around, you're going to get a little bit different end result.
Yeah, you can clean it up, but the best thing to do is get a clean, sharp, clear image. The sharpest, the black and white is always the best. You can do a color trace, but the sharper you can get that image, the less pixelated it is, the better you're going to get a trace.
Now, do you still have the image on the screen? Go up to layers. Layers, right there. No, right there. Bitmap layer. Okay. I don't know where it is. It says it's on, but you must have deleted it. Okay. Well, that's fine. So yeah, there are other ways of doing, an image trace too. You don't have to use the actual trace feature in Vectric. You could draw straight lines at external points all the way around the perimeter, and then go to node editing, and then each straight point you can hit N. Go to node editing by hitting N. At each straight point, hit B for Bezier, and then it'll give you these 2 extra lines. And what you do is you zoom in, and you can use those 2 lines to manipulate that curve to match the image below it.
So you're doing it by hand. You're doing
a lot of times, yeah. And so depending on what it is, sometimes I have better luck. I've done some shooting signs and stuff that I've had a nightmare with image trace. And the amount so I hit image trace, boom, it's done in 2 seconds. Then I got to spend an hour node editing to get the result I want. Or I could just start with straight lines, click around the perimeter. Every time there's a change, like from one direction to another, an inside curve to an outside, you put a point there, and then go ahead and hit B for Bezier, and then just bend those curves to fit. And I have a lot better. I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, but in some designs, it takes a lot less time to do that. Then you have more control over what the final. You also have a lot of control over how many node points you're using. So yeah, it's dependent upon the image that you're trying to trace. And that's how I would do it. We should do a follow up. We'll do an image trace podcast episode with a video one of these
Good
days.
Idea.
And
yeah, we use that more often than you would think. I mean, just to do simple things.
Well, whenever I teach classes, you're trying to get somebody hooked on this concept of having a CNC router instantly. And I always get people say, I don't know, I'm not an artsy person. I don't know how to design anything. And frankly, I'm not an artsy person either. I'm more of a replicator. So if I see something I like, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then, oh, this is cool. And I can figure out how to kind of merge the 2 concepts together, make some changes so that it's custom to me and I'm not directly copying anybody. So a lot of times, first thing I do with anybody is I'll bring in a logo. I'll ask what's your favorite car or whatever, and then I'll pick a logo off Google. I'll bring it in, do a quick image trace, and then do a pocket or a profile cut or something on that, and just show people with the simulation on the screen, like, look, literally, I didn't design anything. The software did all the work. Now, in less than 5 minutes, you could replicate whatever that thing is. Now, I always do that first to get everybody's attention. And then I preface, I'm not telling you to go on Etsy or Pinterest and just steal everything you can find and replicate it, because that's not cool. But you can get a concept down and then build on it from there. I'll do some shooting signs where, like the one in my office, it says group therapy. So that was a target, which was simple. It was a bunch of circles. I didn't have to copy that from anybody. But then I wanted like bullet holes that I wanted V Carve. So I went in, I just did a search for bullet hole clip art, and I found a couple different ones that looked cool. I image traced them, or I manually traced them. I don't remember. And I modified them to fit the design I had, but I took the concept from something else that I saw that just looked cool. Some people, like I have a good friend, David, this guy's insane. I used to work with him in a magazine. I mean, he just, from a blank piece of paper, comes up with the coolest stuff. Like I would kill to be able to do that, to have that much creativity. But I can reverse engineer, and I can come up with things that I want. And that tends to be what I teach when we do a class. Now the other Cornhole board you're using the Connecticut State Seal.
Yep.
Now, when we first sat down, it looked horrible, what you had. So my guess was you image trace that as well from probably a color image or maybe a grayscale that wasn't.
It was a grayscale.
Yeah, okay. So that's why that image had so many artifacts and so many funky lines and stuff like that. Grayscale image tracing in Vectric is an art. You have to really play with the settings. Black and white is just that. It's very black and white. It's either a line or not a line. Grayscale's up for interpretation based on how you have your settings set up on the image trace feature and what you're going to get. So we looked at his image trace that he had, and it was well, I don't want to say it was unusable. I mean, if I took an hour and a half, I could probably have cleaned it up enough to make it usable. But
yeah, it was unusable the way it was.
The way it was,
sure.
yeah.
There were crossing vectors, there were open vectors everywhere. We would have had to done some serious work in there.
So what we ended up doing was we just did a search for in Google for Connecticut State Seal DXF, and that brought us to a link to Etsy. When we got to Etsy, there was a couple designs that used the Connecticut State Seal. You were able to get the SVG file for $2.99. So we just bought that. So Bobby now has
$3 less.
$247.
Oh, we're keeping track.
Yeah. So, but now you have, somebody took the time to make a really clean vector file of the Connecticut seal.
And I wish we almost left this side by side so you can see the difference with even the letters here are nice and clean.
Yeah.
It's a very clean vector. Whoever did this did a really good job.
Yeah. So now you're starting from something that, is clean and you can use that. Now the next question on this one's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of detail in this thing. And, if you zoom into the vines, I'm assuming those are grapevines.
Yep.
Why for Connecticut? I've been here all my life. What the heck do we have grapevines for? I mean, I know there's vineyards around.
My history teacher's
We
going
have
to
the
kick my
Connecticut
butt.
wine trail all through here.
Yeah, but Connecticut's not known for wine.
Oh, I know all the wine is horrible for the most part.
Yeah, I know there's vineyards around here, but it's not something like, oh, let's go to Connecticut. It's a great wine. We'll
be back next week with the answer for that one.
We're an Indian casino state. That's what we're known for. 2 massive casinos. Okay, I'm going to have to look that up because I'm really curious now. They call it the nutmeg state, but that's not nutmeg. I don't know. Okay, well, whatever. I'm going to put a call into the governor and get an answer because this is really bugging me. They're really intricate. So you're going to have to use probably like a 20-degree V-bit. You're going to need to use something very, very pointed and with
It's
high
very
side.
tight.
Yeah, because it's very tight. If you try doing this with like a 90-degree, you're not going to get any detail at all. Even a 45 is going to make it difficult. So you're going to want to pop in, a 15 or a 20-degree V-bit and V Carve this. So you could do the same thing, and this is what I suggest you guys do next week while I'm not here, is take this. I would work on this one, not the Connecticut outline. I would do this one and play with a V Carve inlay with a V Carve plug and see, because that is one way that you can get some incredible detail. One of our customers makes cutting boards. They're insane and with so much detail, and that's how he's doing it. So it's possible. You could epoxy fill this as well, but again, you're going to have some grooves that are so shallow that a bubble in the epoxy could be bigger than the actual depth of the groove that you're going to want the epoxy to be in. So just something to keep in mind. Like this is one I would have probably opted for lasering if I didn't have any other choice, but because the size is pretty good, click on the outside circle on that. And you're at, it's a 15-inch diameter. So it's a pretty big emblem. So, my guess is that a V Carve inlay is going to be really cool for that. You figure out the recipe for making the plug and the pocket using V Carve.
Yeah, and we can clean these grapes, so we don't need all the inside grape detail.
Zoom into those grapevines. Just out of curiosity, what's the distance between like the little half moon, D shape, whatever you want to call it? What is the distance?
Well, from one to the next, you're probably less than a 16th of an inch.
Yeah, that's what I was curious.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to
dive in that deep, but I was just curious.
You can't do a random pocket. The only way
you
you're going to get any detail out of this is if you use a very fine point.
We would get rid of like these, the small D vectors in here that are barely anything.
When it's
I would
all said
try
and
it.
done, it's not
Try
gonna. I don't think it's gonna hurt anything at the end of the day.
I think if you're using a fine enough V Carve bit or V bit on the machine, that you'll get the detail when you do the plug. I think you will. Yeah, I think you would.
Okay.
I think you should try it. And,
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll run just the seal first, and we'll see what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you
If we
could
can get
do
the plugs, and
you could do the whole seal, or you could just draw a square around it and then cut everything out. So like do like a third, like if you were to cut a line down the center and then across and just do 1/4 of it as a sample, because whatever you do on the sample, like I would do the bottom left or right quarter because you've got two different texts in there.
sure, we'll see
And
if
you'll
those texts come out.
You'll catch some of that vine too, so you'll be able to see. But rather than, waste the time, and because to V Carve, that's going to take some time, and then you're going to have to find, some contrasting wood to use for a plug. Just do it out of a small scrap first and see if you get the recipe right before you go, doing something that large. But in the end, I think it'll look really cool when it's done. If you do the board, like, if you leave the board like birch, a color, and then you do like a mahogany or a walnut or something inlay, that would look pretty cool. So that's my suggestion for that. But yeah, when you start getting into detail, you have to really think about what is it you're looking at for your outcome. Do you want it inlaid? Do you want wood inlay, or do you want a color inlay? I know Matt from Tools Today did a video several months back where he used crayons to do an inlay, which I thought was kind of cool.
That was a pretty cool video.
So there are different ways of doing it, but on the cornhole board, the most important thing is that the entire surface needs to be smooth like glass. So you can't just pocket it out and paint it because you'll have ridges. So you could do that, but then you'd have to just fill it with clear epoxy and then polish it, and it'd be fine. So that'll give you yet a different look because the paint will be down deep, and then you're putting clear on it. So it's going to have a different effect on it.
But how would you ever ensure that clear was level? I don't know if you'd be able to ever get that.
Yeah, you would. You just pour it until you see it kind of seep over the top. It's clear, but it's obvious. It's not invisible.
One thing we talked about originally was putting a piece of acrylic. So doing everything, just V carving, doing with some depth to it, and then putting a piece of acrylic on top.
Yeah, you could do that too. That's another idea.
Personally, I think that would look a little cheesy. I don't think it would look as nice. I think that'd be more of like because when you add plastic to a piece of wood, it kind of gives it a cheaper feel.
Yeah, if we were not a CNC podcast and we were a printing podcast, it would be easy because we would just do a full color print with a clear film over it, and then put that on there, and you'd be done. But trying to keep with a CNC concept on this, I'd want to stay away from, using printed stuff. And
well, you can find, there's a dime a dozen of printed cornhole boards out there, but you don't see too many custom inlay type stuff. I think that's where you might be able to carve out a niche. And what's cool about this, you want to start with the state of Connecticut, but now you have 50 states to choose from, right? Well, if you did get someone from Mass,
after all the legwork you see with this, it might just be a Connecticut-specific cornhole board.
But it's not much different.
Forward.
Once you get the process down to design the vectors, it's not much more work to do the same exact thing, but just change the seal there.
right, Bobby's business will be Connecticut Cornhole Boards Are Us, and that's it.
Ooh, I like that.
Just
Connecticut
that's it.
Cornhole.
So only once every person in Connecticut has bought a cornhole board, his business has to close.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah. Or you just have to wait until more people are born.
Now, after this is cut, just because you know material a lot more than I do, would you use a oil-based or a water-based polyurethane to really?
I would use
Now,
oil.
is that going to feed in with a rich amber color at the end of it?
Well, no, it'd be clear. You're talking about polyurethane. So
Yes.
you're going to use an oil-based stain, and then I would use an oil-based urethane over the top of it. You're going to need several coats.
Oh yeah,
because then you're going to want to sand between coats to keep it smooth. And after you have enough buildup on there, then you could literally take like a polishing, like a car polisher, and polish it up so it's nice. And
I think the more we talk about this, the more Bobby is realizing how much
he should
elbow
have just
work he
made
needs to put
coasters.
in. Yeah,
I really should have done coasters.
Should have done Connecticut coasters. That would have been a lot easier. So maybe next week's podcast, it'll be like, we shrunk the cornhole boards. Maybe that's what you do. There's an idea. Let's make cornhole boards for conference tables. Just scale the whole thing down. Then you can sit here at the end of the conference table. We get little bean bags.
Like when you play paper football.
Yeah, and just throw them.
I think that'd be more work than it would save because you still have to you'd have to do all the finishing, you'd have to do all the V carving, and the more you shrink, the harder it's going to be to do the inlays, to do the V carving. I think the bigger it is, the easier it's going to be. It's going to be more physical work, but
yeah, I don't know. But if you screw up, you could screw up like 18 of the small desktop ones versus one.
Mini cornhole boards. What do you think, Bobby?
I don't know. I think
it's actually pretty interesting.
I think you should Google that because I'm not sure if that exists or not. But that'll make our meetings a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
You know, like if in order to like have an opinion, you have to make a score. Otherwise, you have to keep quiet.
That we would know how to shut you up for a little bit.
Yeah, I suck at it, so it would be great. But yeah, I would. I don't know. It's just another idea. But yeah, Bobby's gonna go home tonight going, I should have done a coaster.
There's always, I mean, once you have the vectors, there's always room just to change your original plan.
You could change. I mean, Greg changed his plan 14 times before we even had the first episode.
I mean, we started with 3D soap.
That's true. 3D soap was,
still in my back pocket.
Yeah.
Now, I want to see how this cuts out on like a smaller scale on like, say, our 700. Just see how it turns out.
Okay. So I'm going to go away next week. And then when I get back, I'll just check Instagram. I'll see the samples you post. No, I'm not going to. That's a lie because I don't want to check my phone at all next week. But yeah, I think it'd be cool. I think if this seems overwhelming, and that's the thing with any business, right? Business is all about pivoting. It's all about, I got an idea. I think it's great. And then you kind of pursue that idea and then you do some research or you stumble onto something online or you come across some people and then you pitch them the idea and then they tell you, oh, well, yeah, what about this guy down the road who makes the same exact thing you want? And you're like, well, wait a second now. And then you start really diving in because you can't possibly research everything there is to know. And you know, things show up all the time. So being able to pivot and say, okay, maybe this project's a little more than I want to take on. Maybe I don't have this space to do it. Maybe, you know, as much as you might want one for yourself, and that's the other common thing. A lot of times when people are making projects, like mine, I want a knife case, so I'm building one. But I did the research and I see what's out there and I think I can fill a niche. And if I don't sell any, okay, I invested $250 into my knife case, which would have cost me $380 if I bought one already made on Etsy. So I'm saving money, even if I don't make a sale. But my concept's a little different because I'm going through the how I'm doing it. That's what I'm getting out of it. I'm getting being able to show and illustrate how I'm doing it, how I'm using one machine to replicate many machines. Your concept with the dog or the pet memorial, I think, is by far the best in terms of something that could be easily built into a sustainable business, without a doubt. The cornhole board market, just from doing a quick search a minute ago, is pretty thin. There's a lot of cornhole boards out there. Anybody that has a table saw and some plywood is making cornhole boards. So, and then you go to Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's, and they're for sale all over the place. Yeah,
they're everywhere. But custom ones, maybe that's where you fit in.
Right. So you can do the custom ones, but you could, branch off to that. Maybe tonight you're going to do some research on desktop cornhole boards and they don't exist. And you're like, hey, I'm going to carve a market. And now you've got a project that you would only be able to do on a 4x8 foot machine that you could literally do on a desktop machine now. Right. So this is my point of being able to pivot.
Yeah, no, and this is kind of cool. You see that evolution and that change in your idea. You can have the best idea in the entire world, but it's going to change. It's going to evolve as you figure out the market and everything. And how many times have you had a business idea that you started with and finished with?
Yeah, well, I've had concepts that I started and finished with, but the how changed a lot. My first business was a custom car audio company. And this was before, remember Circuit City? I mean, a long time ago. Ooh. This was even before them. So there was cars were a lot simpler. So there was a market for car audio back then and doing custom work. And I went to school and learned how to do leather and fiberglass and all kinds of fabrication. And that was a pretty good business. And I remember 2 years into it, we were doing really, really well. Had people working for me. We were doing everything from Pintos to Ferraris. Like it was cool. And I remember going, well, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. And then what happened? Like, look at a vehicle now that has the radio integrated completely into the dash with a couple screws and, put a new one in. So that market for that custom audio stuff, which that was essentially the name of my business, custom audio, it shrunk so much that, yeah, if I stuck to that, unless I was prepared to evolve as technology and the industries changed, I would have been out of business. So I sold my business to my partner long before that was ever an issue, and which was a smart decision. We had another business that rcuniverse.com, which still exists today, but this was a radio control forum site that we started back way before Facebook and Twitter, right? So if you wanted to fly model airplanes or helicopters or whatever, and you wanted to meet other like-minded people, this was the website to go to. We had 500,000 subscribers. We got out of it shortly after we sold it, shortly after Facebook started. And I'm glad we did, because the website's kind of more or less a ghost town. You've got some old timers that like the forum concept versus the Facebook group concept, but Facebook made it so like they integrated all that forum stuff right into groups. So it's, I don't know, had we not gotten out, we would have had to pivot. And I don't know that I wanted to compete with Facebook. So you have to just keep your mind open. That's why, something like this. If
it evolves into something that there's a need for,
you got something,
go for it.
Yeah, you have something in mind. I mean, it doesn't make you any less of a business person, or it doesn't make you wishy-washy, as long as you're moving in a direction to something you believe in and you can commit to it. And then again, like when we talked about Greg's last week, imagine that you get a lot of orders. Is it sustainable? Can you make them? Are you going to have to hire 5 people just to fill orders? Or is it something that you could, run, batches of at a machine, and in your garage a couple nights a week and have them ready to go? So you got to keep that in mind. And that's the whole exercise here is this going to be, we're all trying to make a business out of a product, and you don't want your worst case scenario to be, what if I sell a lot? Like that should be your best case scenario. Not
for some reason, nobody ever believes that at first. Nobody ever goes in thinking I'm going to be too overwhelmed. It's, you're so thankful that you got your first sale. I don't know why that is. The human psyche never plans for the good.
Well, it's interesting because I've been going through that over the last 6-8 months with my son, with his business. So it's kind of cool for me because I haven't started a new business in a long time. So I remember when I started Stepcraft here in the States that, I was doing it for a week or two and no sales. And then I started thinking, I'm like, why aren't I getting any sales? I mean, I put a website up. Isn't that the way it works? You put a website up and then just cash starts piling in. And it took a couple of strategic moves to get the ball rolling there. And then, in the beginning, you make your first couple sales and then you start to worry, well, what if I don't get any more? And then it just kind of snowballs and into something that, I don't know, if you asked me then if we would be where we are now, I would be like, you're crazy.
And we still remember the days where we were happy to get a couple sales a week. I mean, that was extraordinary.
Yeah. And now, you're doing that much before lunch. So it's different. And, my son's business is the same thing. He's going through the same thing. He starts and gets one job and he finishes it and he gets nervous. What if I don't get another one? When's the next one going to come? I'm like, man, you haven't even done any marketing. You haven't done anything yet. So nobody even knows you're in business. Just word of mouth can keep you busy. And then once you start opening the floodgates of marketing, it's kind of cool. It's exciting to do that. It's when you dump a lot of money into marketing and you're doing everything you possibly can to sell your product and move your business forward, and you're not making any sales, then you really got to take a look at, am I making this as a hobby because it's something I like, or is there an actual need in the marketplace for what I'm doing? And
I wonder if the downtrend in today's market that's been going on for the past couple of weeks is going to affect this at all. If people are going to have, what do they call it? The distinguishable money or whatever that they can pay for things that they don't really need.
Distinguishable money?
I forget the word for it.
Wow. So your money's on fire and you got to distinguish it.
What's it called?
Discretional income?
Indiscretional. Yeah, discretional.
Discretional income. Yeah. That's what it is.
I wonder.
Distinguishable.
Yeah. We just make up stuff. Somehow
you knew what I meant, though.
I knew exactly what
I knew where you were going. It took me a second to think of the word.
Your own phrases. I think it's certainly a possibility. What excites me about what we do, and that's why we're doing this podcast and everything, is if you start to get nervous because the economy starts to take a downturn, you might want to move towards having a side business, right? It's always comfortable to have your main job and then a little side hustle that you're running that, can grow into something. Now, I guess if the whole market crashed, maybe everybody, like right now, you can't find baby formula anywhere. There's some weird stuff going on in the world right now that doesn't make any sense, but people that we talk to are still excited about buying a machine and getting started, whether it's a business or they have a specific need for it. So I know a lot of people who are in business right now, and nobody's really told me that they're scared or they're nervous yet. But everything is cyclical. It takes time. So, who knows? I live by, plan for the worst, hope for the best. And that way you're never blindsided. So yeah, in this, would somebody maybe, summer's coming and you don't have money to go on vacation and you want to have something to do at your house. Would you go out and buy a cornhole board to have some fun or, get some buddies over every night? Sure. Would I go to Walmart and buy one for a set for $100
No.
versus paying somebody $400 or $500 for a custom set? Well, now I have to really look at that.
Got to go with the custom set.
Yeah, of course. I mean, kids don't need to eat and you don't need to pay the mortgage. So,
Bobby, sell me this pen.
Yeah, sell me this pen.
Fantastic Blue Point.
Yeah, see?
Partially broken hip clip.
Yeah.
I don't know what that would be called.
And then it's like, here, I want to write you a check. Do you have a pen? And then you hand them. Do you know that from Wolf of Wall Street?
No, I never watched it.
Oh, he's
Bobby.
playing along and didn't even know what you were talking about.
Next week episode,
to
we're going to watch The Wolf of Wall Street
Oh
together.
my goodness!
Tell me a pen is a very common term.
Nah, in The Wolf of Wall Street, there's a whole thing about it.
Yeah, no, never watched it.
Oh yeah, I
Tried
think
to.
Greg and I have probably seen that movie a dozen times.
Every time it's on cable TV,
Yeah, that's a good movie.
and every time it's not on cable TV, I put it in.
So, yeah, we're veering from V Carve here, but it's interesting how things kind of play out. I mean, originally we were sitting here at table, and I was thinking, okay, these guys, Bobby's not prepared with his project. Maybe we shouldn't record. And I'm like, you know what? Let's just do it anyway, and let's see what comes of it. Because I keep going back to the original concept we had when we started this kind of series was it's not just about the project or just about the CNC machine. It's about the mindset, the process, and the yin and the yang of the whole thing. And so, yeah. And as it turns out, I mean, we're talking about real things. These are real issues.
We're not going to try to hide stuff from you because we don't know how to do something. We're going to go through the entire process and see what are some challenges, what are some ups and downs. And hopefully next week we'll have some stuff cut and we don't burn down the place when Eric's not here.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And we'll go from there.
But I think, we'll see what you guys come up with for an inlay on that. And then next week, well, when I get back the week after, we're going to start, I think we're all going to start making the projects. Yours is ready. Mine is almost ready. I just have to make the vacuum fixtures, and then I can get going on that. Bobby's going to change his idea a couple times, so who knows? Maybe he'll be CNCing toothpicks with the 4th axis by the time we get down. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, we'll keep this process going, and we may do some fillers in too. I know last week Greg and I did a filler because Bobby wasn't here. We talked about what to expect when you're expecting a CNC. What'd you think of my little stork icon?
We try.
Yeah, we try. I'm not a graphic guy. You could definitely tell when you look at that cover. But yeah, we try to mix it up, and we are looking at feedback that we're getting and questions that are being asked, and trying to kind of divert things into making sure we're covering all that. But if you guys have any questions, comments, whatever, please let us know on what we're doing here. If you got any ideas for any of us on our projects, or some thoughts on Bobby's project here, please let us know that as well. But I think, yeah, we pretty much used up some time, and we appreciate everybody coming along on this ride with us, and we'll look forward to getting the next podcast out for you next week.
Till next week.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Think It, Make It podcast. Be sure to tune in next time for more great CNC router content.